Good morning, everyone. I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to Salem, and we did not have a tour, so I won't talk about a tour that we had yesterday because this is just the Salem meeting. I am Mary Wall, Chair of the Oregon Fish and Wildlife Commission, and I'd like to call the August 9th meeting to order. I live in Langlois on the South Coast, and I'll ask the other commissioners to introduce themselves.
Good morning, I'm Becky Hatfield Hyde, and I am from Brothers, Paisley, and the Klamath Basin.
Good morning, Mark Labhart. I live in Sisters.
Yeah, good morning. Also, Bob Spellbrink, Celeste, Oregon.
Good morning, Dr. Leslie King, Portland, Oregon.
Thank you. And could we go to our online commission member?
Hi, Kathy and Khalil, Portland, Oregon also.
Thank you. Director Colbert.
Good morning, I'm Debbie Colbert, Director of Fish and Wildlife.
And Roxanne, could you introduce yourself, please, and give us anything we need to know about the system?
Yes, good morning, Chair Wall, Commissioners, Director Colbert. I'm Roxy Borish. I'm here to support the commissioners and the directors for today's hybrid meeting. We're expecting everything to run smoothly, but in case of any technical difficulties, we'll address them as quickly as possible. Thank you.
And thank you for taking on this role while Michelle's gone.
Very glad to.
Appreciate it.
Run smoothly, Bart.
I'll turn to the director then for the director's report.
All right, good morning. So commissioners, you'll see in your packet that you have the field reports in written form. And so first up, we'll invite Ken Loffink for the expenditure report.
Director, I have a question about the field report whenever it's appropriate.
Yeah, why don't we go ahead, Chair Wall, does that sound good?
Yep, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Wall. I realize they're in written only, so the, I guess, general public doesn't see them or can't see them. But what I had a question I wanted to comment and get something on record about all of the closures and all the reactions to the closures to the shellfish season on the coast. I've been there now twice since all of that happened and got an earful both times about it. I know that we've talked about it briefly, but I did count. There were 9 different bullet points of the interventions you guys did to inform folks what was happening, why, and trying to keep people up to date. But I will say, still people stated that they didn't know. The state troopers were out there chasing people around and making them stop digging because the messages didn't get through. So I'm wondering if we have done, will we do anything more, like, sort of billboards at the public beach entrances or something? Because they clearly, a lot of people did not know about the closures.
Commissioner King, we are always trying new and additional ways, and we can continue to do so. I do know that we did a lot of posting along the beaches, but there's always more that we can, and we're open to doing that.
Right. No, I know, and I, like I said, I read the 9 bullet points. You clearly did a whole lot. But I think many people said if there were signs, they didn't see them. So I guess we just need to probably be more strategic, like put them at the public beach access or put them certain distances on the beach, because the problem is there's too many ways to access the beach. So where you put the sign, somebody literally just won't see it. So many people said that they didn't know, and thankfully the state troopers who were out there, spotting and watching, caught a lot of people digging and advised them to stop. So again, thank you to our state troopers, but it just was a bit alarming that it went that far, that people still didn't get all of our messaging.
I would also just mention that the field reports are on the Commission's website, along with all of the materials for the meeting.
Thank you.
Let's go next to
Thank you.
The expenditure report. Ken.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Wall, Vice Chair Hatfield Hyde, Commissioners, Director Colbert. For the record, my name is Ken Loffink. I'm the Acting Deputy Director for Administration. Happy to kick things off this morning with the agency's financial report. Today's report covers the month ending June 30th, 2024. And as of that time, the department's unrestricted cash balance finished at $86.4 million, and restricted cash came in at $73.5 million for a total of $160 million at State Treasury. Now, if you remember back to June, this does reflect a pretty significant increase from our ending balance in June. What that reflects is a $26 million insurance payment that we received from the DAS Insurance Fund relating to the 2020 wildfires. So that just hit the books in early July. And so even though that is reflected in unrestricted cash, that is, those funds are somewhat obligated to cover the damages from those fires. In addition, we're just coming off May and June, which were great sales months for ODFW. They're our two strongest sales months of the year. And we are entering the time now, well, just naturally so, getting the back end of the calendar where we're going to see sales start to drop off a little bit. And we do expect us to start eating to that ending balance a little bit. In addition, you have in front of you the agency's expenditure report. All revenues and expenditures are tracking as expected. June 30, 2024 is the 50% mark in the biennium, so it does provide a pretty good benchmark for like where we're at. Revenues are tracking. As you'll notice in the report, our expenditures thus far, we've expended 32% of our agency limitation. We always spend more in the second half of the biennium. It's just kind of the nature of things, and it's also reflected of some of the self-imposed freezes and spending savings that we're trying to have for other fund just to balance some shortfalls in certain sectors. For 25-27 budget development, as you remember, back in June in Chiloquin, we presented our agency request budget, and you all approved that agency request budget at that commission meeting. The last couple of months since then, our budget team's been furiously entering those numbers in the state budget system. It's a really busy time for those folks, so really appreciate all their work. We are leading up to the final submission to the governor's office and DAS, which will occur at the end of this month, and we're on track to do that. And then finally, just want to speak real quick about our audit team and some audit updates. We had an audit committee meeting in July where we did a variety of things, and one of the things we did is select our audit topics for the 2025 year. Those audit topics are going to be the ODFW safety program and our landowner preference landowner preference tag program. In addition, we were able to close out several audits that we've been working on over the past couple years. Those include our online time tracking information system, our controlled hunt process and ELS access, cash handling audit, which was performed by the Secretary of State, and then our United States Fish and Wildlife Service Title VI review. In addition, I just wanted to mention that we are undergoing audit currently from the Office of Inspector General, that's from the Department of Interior, and they're reviewing our wildlife and sport fish restoration program grants and our spend there. This is something that occurs every 6 years, so it's a lot of work, but we are doing that, and they're planning site visits for fall. That's all I have this morning, but happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ken. Commissioners, any questions? Ken, I have two. One of them is, you've been talking when you present the budget about the constraints that we're under this time. Could you say one or two things just about why the constraints are so much this time in terms of, is it the federal money that we had during COVID has shifted away? Is that part of it, or what are we looking at? And then I have one other question.
So our current budget constraints, yeah. So I'll just use the same talking points we did during our ARB presentation in June. Is that our costs, the increase in our increase in costs has been far outpaced what we expected. I mean, and that's reflected in just inflation in general. We've also had several other unexpected costs, and this is mostly within our fish division, where just the cost of operations is exceeding what we expected at this point. So that's the main reason. And then, yes, in addition, a lot of our federal funds have been flat funded, and that's an ongoing challenge that we have to navigate every year.
And usually in this budget process, I mean, it's different every 2 years, but sometimes there are strategies that are playing out to bring some of these big things back. And the one I'm specifically thinking about all the time is the beaver modified habitat and the beaver management plan that we have. And we were really relying on some of those funds to be our budget for some of that activity that we've already started. Yep. So when will we have some idea if that's going to be there?
Chair Wall, I think we're going to be continually evaluating, our budgets, and right now, like our focus is to fund our base budgets and our current service level for our various programs. And I'll be honest, I'm not sure exactly where that falls in the strategy for how we fund those programs. We're continually evaluating, and when it comes time to this biennium's budget, as we get closer to the end, we're going to be looking at what's in our ending balance, what do we have in limitation, and it's kind of a blend of those two. Just because we have money in the bank doesn't mean that we can spend it. We need authority to spend it from the legislature. So it really is continuing to look at that. We're going to come back here again in, say, January and have a better idea of like, all right, what's our ending balance look like? What's our expenditure limitation look like? And give us some idea of like what room is there to spend. And then that we're having those conversations when it comes to the 25-27 biennium as well, and working with DAS and the governor's office and our partners on what that looks like going forward. But I'm not doing a great job of answering the question, but it's a blend of the two, and we're continuing to evaluate what our options are throughout the biennium.
Thank you.
Yep.
Appreciate it. Commissioner Laphart and then Commissioner King.
Okay, thank you. This is mainly looking to the future. The OWEB Board, Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, is met last week, a week and a half ago, and is looking at the potential for, with all these fires, we're at 1.4 million acres now, and we're kind of at the height of fire season now, so it's anticipation that we'll have more acres burned and significant damage to fish and wildlife habitat throughout the state of Oregon. And it's caught the attention of legislators, both federal and state legislators. And as we had with the drought package, I think we can anticipate that the federal government's probably going to step up to the plate. Maybe state legislatures in the future are going to step up to the plate to provide some funding for rehabilitation. And so I would just like us to continue to look to the future just a little bit, that in anticipation of some significant dollars probably coming to ODF&W from various sources, state, federal, private, foundations, all those kind of things, for getting dollars out on the ground to try to address some of these significant habitat destruction issues that we face. So just to be thinking about that.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you. Commissioner King. And
Thank
then
you,
we'll-
Chair Wall. Thank you, Ken. For the pie graph that you guys always give us, the revenue and then the expenditures, particularly for the revenue, can you guys also start to put on there the percentages?
Yeah. Dr. King, we can certainly put on the percentages for the revenue. Yeah, if that's a future ask, we can certainly do that.
Because the reason I'm asking is, again, it's kind of future thinking, because for example, just looking at the raw numbers and one is yellow and one is green, if you let, that whole thing that is, quote, other.
Yep.
And it's the biggest thing. It's half, really. I mean, and I always ask this question, what's in other? Maybe list that as well.
We can certainly do that, Commissioner King. The other fund is kind of a catch-all of sorts. It is not federal, it's not lottery, it's not general, it's other, but it includes our state fish and wildlife, hunting and fishing license revenue, commercial license revenue, various other dedicated grants and whatnot that go into our other spending limitation. It is a big category that captures a lot of things. It's our indirect pool as well. But I can look into that with...
Yeah, maybe not all of them. Sorry
Sure.
to cut you off. You don't have to put all of them. But the one you said first is what I was trying to get out of you. That's where licensing is.
Yep.
It's 50%. It's the biggest pot, right?
Yep.
Okay. Now, again, future thinking. What this entire department, all of us are thinking about in terms of the coming legislative term, et cetera, is we've got to start to find, quote, other funding, right? Because that big number is at risk, because as the licensing fees, meaning the amount of people that are buying them, are decreasing, we're going to have to replace them with something, if that's the biggest part of our budget. So that's an argument, that's something that we need to state and understand and make very, very clear why we're doing what we're doing. Because the biggest hit is in that other, therefore we're looking for alternative funding. Whether it's taxes, whether it's conservation stamps, whatever we're doing, it's going to be a multi-pronged strategy, but this is why.
Yeah, thank you, and we can certainly maybe add a little more granularity to that visual. I will point you to the spreadsheet that's right before that. If you go to the top, it does kind of break it down by hunter angler, license revenue, commercial fisheries fund, and then all other categories. So it does that a little bit there, just in the hard numbers, but we can do that visually as well.
Okay, great. Yeah, like I said, this is all the handy information that I'm sure people are going to be looking at and quoting when they're going for all of these other alternative funding options, and stressing as to why. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. All right, commissioners, next we have your Adapting to Climate and Ocean Change report. And we're going to be talking about balancing land use, energy siting, and species resiliency in Oregon. And we've got Sarah Wright. Members of the commission, Director Colbert, Sarah Wright, Habitat Division Administrator. Good to see you all this morning. And with me, I have Jeremy Thompson, our energy coordinator in the Habitat Division, and not with us today, but a significant contributor to this presentation is Joy Lovett. She is our land use and waterway alterations coordinator. So, thank you, Steve. Should I repeat any part of that, or are we okay for the record? Okay. So we're here this morning to bring you the next installment in our year-long series on the advancing resiliency of species in a changing climate. And as you know, we've really been focusing this year on the role that natural and working lands play in climate resiliency. If you recall, we kind of been taking you on a little bit of a virtual tour of Oregon in this conversation about natural and working lands. We started with talking about farms and rangeland and the role that they play. Then we talked about blue carbon and coastal habitats, and then we swung over to the high desert and the wetlands in central and eastern Oregon and talked about the role that natural and working lands play in those geographies. In September, we are going to be talking about forest lands and the role that forest lands play for species resiliency in a warming climate. But for this month, we're going to zoom out from any one particular habitat type or any one particular working landscape to talk about something that influences all natural and working lands, and that is land use and energy siting. And then, if you recall, this will all culminate in December with a roundtable conversation with the commission and stakeholders and partners as we think about how we might accelerate our efforts to ensure species resiliency. So one of the primary strategies the department is using to support species resilience is giving fish and wildlife the opportunity to adapt. And that happens in a few ways, or our strategy is sort of taking place in a few ways. One is give them enough space so they can meet their life history requirements. Two is connect their habitats so that they can move, they can migrate, and they can shift their ranges as might become necessary. Three is provide thermal refuge. And this is particularly important for our aquatic species, but also for our terrestrial species, so they can survive the hottest and driest seasons. And then lastly, provide high-quality habitats to ensure health and productivity, and so that you don't run into issues with disease and population decline. And natural and working lands are really critical to our ability to provide these opportunities for wildlife to adapt. However, these lands lose their functionality and their connectivity for wildlife when they become converted to other land uses, like housing developments, mines, highways, and energy facilities. And so here's where the complexity comes in and why land use and energy are a key conservation issue in the Oregon Conservation Strategy, which is our state wildlife action plan. Oregon needs more housing and infrastructure. We're hearing a lot about that. Oregon also has ambitious clean energy goals, and Jeremy will talk to us about that. Both of those things are going to require conversion of more working lands in order to meet those targets. But as we've been discussing all year, it's important that we sustain those working lands for fish and wildlife and for a number of other co-benefits. And so no matter from which angle you're looking at this intersection, there's this growing sense of urgency for everyone as the effects of a warming, drying climate are accelerating. So everyone's feeling it, no matter from which angle you're looking at this. And these are tough trade-offs. And there are multiple planning efforts, multiple roundtables, collaborations, and rulemakings that are underway with the regulatory agencies and stakeholders to try and find workable solutions to these, what are intersectional challenges. And ODFW, we're at those tables. We take a very solution-oriented approach
when we engage and look for that balance between the need to provide for species resiliency and the need for housing, the need for energy, as well as sustainable working lands. In terms of how and where we engage, early engagement really is the key. So in this graphic, it's like the highest level of engagement where conversations take place most proactively for how to bring fish and wildlife considerations into land use decision making is at that legislative level and at the statewide planning level. And so that's where we find the ability to be most effective. It gets increasingly difficult to integrate fish and wildlife concerns when you get down to the project level and you're dealing with a specific landowner or a specific developer. They've already invested a lot of money into the situation, and they have a permitting timeline they're trying to get through. So that's a crunch when you winnow it down to the project level. If we can proactively identify things like exclusions, critical areas for fish and wildlife, or if we can incentivize development in places where there are fewer issues at that legislative or that county level, that's where we really can be most effective. By way of a quick refresher, Oregon's statewide land use planning system, this has been around since 1973. The state just celebrated its 50-year anniversary of what is touted as a model land use planning system across the nation. It's administered by the Department of Land Conservation and Development, or DLCD, and they're responsible for providing the sideboards of planning and ensuring local governments carry out the intent of the land use program in their permitting and their planning, so in their ordinances and their land use codes. It's a really important system for the work that we do and for fish and wildlife, because it helps limit the conversion of farm and forest land and brings in natural resource values into the way we grow and develop here in the state of Oregon. And we rely on this for maintaining working lands and their wildlife habitat functions. Important to note that in land use, we play a non-regulatory role. We make recommendations to the state, to our state partner in DLCD. We make recommendations to the counties and to the cities, and we follow our statutes, our rules, the policies that are guided by your decisions, but we are not regulatory. And so it's really important that we come into this with a very practical, a very reasonable approach, recognizing that the decision makers involved in this are balancing trade-offs. Wanted to just provide you with a little bit of an update on some very recent moves related to the housing crisis. So Oregon has recently adopted some very ambitious housing goals. In response to the rising home costs and the homelessness crisis, in 2023, we saw Governor Kotek announce her executive order. 2304 is the executive order, and that called for basically a doubling in the housing construction rate. And she, by their estimates, estimated that we would need to be building roughly 36,000 new homes per year for the next 10 years in order to rise to the occasion. And then in the 2024 short session, we saw passage of a comprehensive set of bills, a legislative housing package. And this package of bills did a number of things. It changed state land use laws to make it easier for cities to build homes and to consider new land capacity, including streamlining the process for urban growth boundary expansions, as well as exchanges, land exchanges. It established the Housing Accountability and Production Office and invested nearly $370 million for infrastructure developments, stormwater, wastewater, roads, bridges, et cetera, in these communities where the housing developments are going to be needed, as well as to provide for the homelessness issue, so things like shelters and rental assistance. So it's a big push, it's a big need, And, we're there to try and help find solutions and help meet that need. We focus on the co-benefits when we're in those conversations. So for example, if we're talking about urban growth boundaries, we understand that there is going to need to be increased land capacity to build houses, but we're also there to remind folks of the co-benefits that come with having an urban growth boundary. For example, if you have higher density infill development and you're considering that at the statewide planning level or at the county planning level, you create a lot of benefits, improved livability. Your communities are walkable. People can actually reach the store or amenities that they may need. It also creates fish and wildlife benefits if you maintain that urban growth boundary in terms of habitat protection and climate resiliency, habitat connectivity. It keeps farm and forest in production, helps sustain that part of our economy. And it also has this co-benefit of improving our resilience to hazards. So it creates a buffer from wildland fire, a buffer from floods, and a buffer from those human-wildlife conflicts that tend to come along with the more kind of traditional urban sprawl. So that's just one example of kind of how we approach those conversations. I also wanted to highlight just a couple of examples for you of the ways in which we've been engaging lately in land use issues around the state. So one is by really trying to create a more data-rich environment for this decision-making, really bringing the fish and wildlife data that we have, for example, the priority wildlife connectivity area data and models that we've recently developed, really trying to make sure that counties and the state have that information at hand. For example, in Wasco County, they recently initiated a comprehensive plan update, and they coordinated with ODFW. I believe, Jeremy, you were involved in that as well, and incorporated our best available data for fish and wildlife, as well as working with local staff on drafting land use ordinances that protect fish and wildlife habitat, including species from the conservation strategy. So those are the kinds of efforts that are really worth our time, and really you can mark those as a win. Collaborating with industry. So in the case of things like the aggregate mining or the solar industry, we're actually having conversations with those industry associations and with the developers themselves to develop programmatic guidance on best practices they can use to avoid impacts to fish and wildlife habitat while still meeting their operational needs. So that's novel territory for us to actually be sitting down with developers and really digging in. Of course, participating in every state and local process that we can, especially with our regional habitat biologists. Those are the staff that are really playing a key role in that work. And then just also thinking really creatively on the mitigation front. Historically, mitigation was, if this is your impact, this is your postage stamp mitigation, and it was kind of spread out across the landscape. And we're really thinking about changing the way that looks so that mitigation is consolidated. We're entertaining creative ideas around mitigation banking, really trying to scale up mitigation to create more landscape scale benefits. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jeremy to sort of shift us from land use to the energy siting issues.
Yeah, which is a nice natural transition because they really go together. Chair Wall, Vice Chair Hatfield-Hyde, Commissioners, Director Colbert. For the record, my name is Jeremy Thompson. I'm our Energy Program Coordinator here in Habitat Division. And I just want to briefly discuss the current state of energy siting and a lot of the collaboration and challenges and opportunities that we see in that arena working there as an agency. So I think first, we all recognize the decarbonization goals of the state. They're pretty ambitious when we look west-wide. Some of the legislation that drives that is we looked first at Senate Bill 1547 in 2016 that set a requirement that 50% of our energy came from renewable energy sources. You can look at Executive Order 2004 that mandated that we look at 100% reduction in our carbon emissions throughout the system based off a 1990 baseline. And then we kind of pivot to House Bill 2021 that mandated that all of our large utilities in the state look to get to 100% renewable power by 2040. So these are kind of that baseline that helps drive the conversation in our state that moves us towards that decarbonization goal. In addition, since 2019, we've seen multiple other bills that have been introduced that really have been driven towards streamlining the permitting process to help us meet those goals. And a lot of those new legislative concepts have had caveats in them that would have reduced some of the protections for fish and wildlife that we currently see within the permitting standards. I think also we need to talk about, as we look at those mandates, it's also important for us as an agency to think about what does that mean? What is the needed energy to meet that mandate? And working through the collaborative partnerships that Sarah mentioned, we generally look at an estimate of about 30 gigawatts of new renewable generation that will have to come online to help us meet those goals. Just kind of a baseline to think about that. It takes about 6 acres with current technology to create a single megawatt of solar. So you're looking at 180,000 acres roughly to meet our goals within solar. It's harder as we talk about wind. It's harder to figure out how much. Yeah, wrong slide. Clicked too soon, sorry about that. It's harder when we talk about wind to try to equate that to the land mass necessary, because it really comes into a topographical scale of where we can put the wind turbines to get the generation we need. So, knowing that target really helps us in these planning and collaborative efforts that we talk about and that we try to participate in. As we're in these efforts, really we're advocating for that thoughtful siting that reduces the impacts to those critical habitats and hopefully helps maintain access to the land and waters as they're currently being used, both for working lands and for our recreational constituents on the landscape. We also want to work with the development community to incorporate considerations for animal movement and project design. A lot of the recent projects we've seen have been solar. Solar by national standards has to be fenced. So how can we look at facilitating animal movement in these large landscapes, multiple thousands of acres, multiple miles of fencing? How can we develop passage through there for both small mammals and large ungulates in a thoughtful manner? And I think lastly, it's important, we still see wind development proposed in the state. We work a lot, both on the technology scale and the siting concepts, at finding ways to try to minimize take of wildlife. Within wind, we worry more not about the displacement of animals from that fencing regime that we see in solar, but from the take of eagles and bats in our state and trying to reduce that impact.
So question. Jeremy, I'm going to put you on the spot just a little bit. I don't know if you have the answer to these, but of those figures, the 10, 18, 4, and 3, where are we on those right now? In other words, increase renewable generation by 10-fold. Where are we on that one?
So that's about what you can estimate we need to have. When you look at the
where are we?
current operational projects throughout the state, we need to increase the current generation from renewable sources approximately 10 times more than what we have in our portfolio today.
We're at about 3 gigawatts of renewables.
Okay.
Yeah, with more coming online every day. But
What about solar?
solar, it's just starting to come online. So you're at about 2 gigawatts, and it's hard to put all of that together because a lot of our early solar development was at the county level. So, as you drive from Portland to Salem, you see some small projects scattered around. It's hard to add all of those up to know which utility they're going to. And they may not even be energy that's being used in the state. So we probably have about 6 megawatts of current generation if you add our wind and our solar, and that's a rough estimate on my part. But part of that's exported, right? Within the Western energy grid, we share energy with some of our neighboring states. So from generation that's currently used in the state, we estimate about 3 gigawatts of what we're producing in Oregon is coming into our Oregon portfolio of use.
Okay.
So to meet that 30 gigawatts that we somewhat assume and recognize that number is generated prior to a lot of the explosion in artificial intelligence as well. So the target may be changing, but we think that's about where we need to be.
Okay. Thank you.
So we're fortunate in Oregon. We actually have a defined role within project permitting and siting. A lot of the other Western states don't have that. We have a seat at the table to come in and advocate for the wildlife resources that are important to Oregonians. When we look at the larger scale projects in Oregon, those go through the Energy Facility Siting Council at Department of Energy. They have referenced our mitigation policy within their rules, and we have a very defined role through those large project permitting scenarios where we work directly with our partners at ODO and the FSEC to try to make sure that the mitigation proposed, the species impacts that are estimated are suitable for the project that's being proposed. Additionally, at the county level, we have a role there. Within county rules, it's defined that they must provide mitigation. That mitigation is ultimately decided by the county. So a little bit less engagement by our staff, but still the ability to advocate for the resources within Oregon. Recent legislation has been aimed at increasing the size of projects that are allowed to be permitted by counties. So currently you can permit a solar project up to just over 3,800 acres if it's outside of agricultural ground through a county permitting process. That was through House Bill 3179 that allowed that increased permitting through the county process. We have a couple other bills that came out that are referenced on this slide. These are trying to help us find what those targets are for renewable energy needs, trying to get out the question that Commissioner Labhart was asking. One, the energy siting through Department of Energy is really trying to answer that question specifically. And then as we look at House Bill 3409, that's trying to look at where can we site these resources that will have the least amount of conflict, not only with natural resources, but with natural working lands, agricultural interests, forestry interests, community interests, and everyone else that wants that seat at the table to talk about what could be impacted through this build out. So, and I think it's important to note that while our mitigation policy is referenced for commercial scale energy projects, Sarah mentioned it in the housing scenario, we're still non-regulatory. We still have to provide an advocacy role, if you will, and an informational role in trying to make sure that these projects are built in a way to avoid and minimize primarily, but also mitigate any of the impacts that may come in. What we try to do is really highlight those areas that are most important for wildlife. And in most cases, I think as you look back to the triangle slide that Sarah had, we're able now to work early with project proponents and developers to try to talk about those concerns early and often and help build out that understanding before we get to the project permitting phase. I love dirty slides with lots of, Sarah let me keep this one. For a long time, it was only ODFMW that were raising these fish and wildlife concerns in the energy conversation. It's been a priority for us to grow these partnerships. And while we're finding success at getting more voices in the room, there's still a lot more space to get our partners involved in advocating for fish and wildlife in these planning and siting conversations. To maximize effectiveness, having advocates available to speak to the broad array of potential resource impacts that may be encountered is key. The logos on this slide are really meant to represent the diversity of partners we're engaged with, and it's not an exhaustive list. There's so many more that are helping us as well. I wanted to highlight just a small subset of some of our current efforts that we're working in to help demonstrate how our staff across the state are trying to be out and advocate for Oregon's resources. First, we talked about the collaboration need. We've recently released our solar guidance document. It's a solar siting guidelines for the state of Oregon. A lot of Western states, a lot of states throughout the United States, if you will, have been putting forward their own state-specific guidelines, and this is our version. This document's envisioned really to serve as a central data clearinghouse for our staff, but also provide our development partners a deeper understanding of what ODF&W will look at in a specific project. And that helps to ensure that, we're coming into these conversations with a base understanding with the development community so they know what we're going to ask for, we know where our points of concern are. To make sure that we had that buy-in from our partners, we did extensive outreach. We worked with a lot of the industry associations that Sarah mentioned, really trying to talk through the document and make sure that we had everything in there that would be of value to them as well as our staff. That really led to a better final product, I think, and it's led to a greater adoption of those guidelines by our industry partners as well. Along a similar path, there's a lot of efforts with other state fish and wildlife agencies, both through the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies and recently kicking off through the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, trying to look at, first and foremost, communication protocols. So through the AFWA lens, we've released 2 different documents over the years. One was a wind communications framework that really keyed off of the wind energy guidelines for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And then just recently, we did a very similar document for solar. Solar doesn't have a national guidelines attached to it. We don't have that same Fish and Wildlife Service hook that we did in wind. So now we're probably going to kick into an industry collaborative work group to try to build that solar guideline at a national level as well. These were collaborative documents, both of them, with America Clean Power and the Energy and Wildlife Action Committee, which are both industry representative groups. So both were done collaboratively, working with industry partners. And the last partnership I want to mention, I think, is the most impactful. That's that local level relationship that all of our staff around the state have. Having those relationships with the county entities, like all of our field biologists do, really help us to be successful in those county planning conversations that are becoming more and more common as we site energy projects. So, ultimately, I think we all understand that ODF&W is committing all of this resource that we do to help us meet the mission of the agency. But to do that, we really need to be able to highlight, I think, in that data-driven context that Sarah mentioned, we need to be able to show not only where the highest level of concern may be for new projects, but also where are those mitigation opportunities. As we move away from this piecemeal mitigation concept that we had historically, as we learned through that early wind build out in the Columbia Plateau, how can we identify areas that would have the greatest impact as we move forward with mitigation? Sarah mentioned PWCAs. We're leveraging a lot also with the recently adopted sage-grouse maps when we look at areas not only to avoid but to mitigate. And then also looking at some of the newly developed migration corridor data. You were able to see some of that in the recently released mule deer plan. Being able to find those key areas has been critical for us in these conversations, and being able to communicate those out in a public manner. We're also trying to find those most climate resilient habitats. Maybe we don't have an agency specific data set in hand that would get us there, but really how do we identify those? How can we put that mitigation effort to those areas? I think the important part is to meet that 2040 target of 100% clean energy in Oregon. We're going to see a lot more permitting over the next 10 years. We're starting to see that increase now. So we're trying to put all of this work in that Sarah and I have talked about to make sure that we're positioned well so everybody understands where our concerns are before we hit that wave and we're at that permitting phase where it's tough to get the considerations that we want.
Thanks, Jeremy. Okay, last slide here, sort of pulling it all together. You might be asking the question, so how is it going? I won't sugarcoat it. We're not regulatory. So our recommendations, sometimes they're considered and adopted and sometimes they are not. And especially on the energy side of things, as the authority has been pushed down from the state level to the county level, there's variability in implementation across the 36 counties. And we're still filing the occasional appeal to projects that we don't feel are being implemented according to the state's standards and protections for fish and wildlife. Appreciate Department of Justice's partnership on those. Those are challenging to work through. I think we've had some recent precedent-setting successes in that realm that are setting the stage and are kind of helping counties understand where the bounds are of allowing projects to move forward. We're also seeing in the housing sphere where issues like housing needs and climate urgency, they're real needs, but they get used almost kind of like a cudgel at the at the expense of these other values that Oregonians have stated are important, like natural resource protection. And so, we're there to remind folks that Oregonians, in the public trust, there is an expectation that these resources are going to continue to be protected and that we're going to be really thoughtful in how we develop. And that's the Oregon way, right? And just to end on the high note, I think we believe there's space in the state to meet all of these goals. It has to be done collectively and thoughtfully. It's a bit more than just a business decision. A lot of this work is meant to be proactive, and so as you've been hearing us say, let's have the conversation early, before we get to the project level. And can't stress enough the importance of those relationships with industry, with our regulatory partners, with our conservation organizations. And the data issue, I think we need to continue to find ways to make this a more data-rich endeavor, both in terms of needing more and better data to answer the questions around impacts, but also in terms of getting local governments to better integrate our data into their regulatory and planning processes. And I think if we do these things, if we're creative, if we update our data, if we collaborate, if we take a really balanced approach, if we get the partnerships right, and if we come to the table with compromised solutions, which is what the climate policy suggests that we do, I think that's where it goes best. So I think we'll end on that note and take any questions you may have.
It looks like we do have a question from Commissioner King first.
Yeah, thank you, Chairwell. Thank you for your report. Thank you. As you guys were talking, I was thinking of a friend of mine at Urban Green Space Institute, and one of their quotes is, "Through livable cities is how you protect working lands." It's something like that. And this is the disconnect that I see, and I see it all the time. And I'm wondering if we can start to change some of this metric. I realize we don't have any role in terms of, we have no regulatory powers. But can we start to see cities as working lands? Because I can tell you, I get an earful from folks, like some of the folks that actually started the Oregon Conservation and Recreation Fund. They insist that they have working lands with pollinator corridors and fish passage and all the things that we talk about, but we never include the cities when we talk about this. And in many ways, if we started using the existing working lands in cities, wouldn't that help us with all of these endeavors? And that's kind of, that's what's, as you guys have been talking, that's been kind of what's spinning in my head, is not just all the urban areas. You have to realize, I guess, Oregon's like everyone else. 87% of the population lives in cities and towns. So by not including them, we're not including most of where our potential impact is. And which brings me to energy siting. And this House Bill 3409, I think that's the one, the energy siting one. For example, is there siting in cities? Like on roofs, brand new, it's Portland, so they had to displace the homeless to create this, sadly, but it's a new solar farm in a field, in a city. So it's like are we using that siting for our existing space? Don't put this out there in the sagebrush sea. There's a lot of space in a city to put this. So, are we using it in that way? And I just like it, the thing I always say, it's not an or, it's an and. Mm-hmm. We need to include these other places where they're doing much of the same thing that you talk about, but we never connect. And I'm wondering how we can pivot that a little bit, because I was looking at your lovely slide of all the partners. Don't see many, and I know a lot in the Tri-County space that would be in this siting working lands group that I don't see listed. So I'm wondering, where are we in this space? I'll let you guys try and answer.
Yeah, I'll go first maybe, and then I'll pass it to you for the energy piece. Chair, Commissioner King, thank you for that question. I think for the sake of brevity, we didn't talk about how we kind of show up in the urban spaces, but I was hoping you would ask this question. So when we talk about natural and working lands, included in the natural lands are the urban open spaces and the corridors that go through the cities. And these, these parks and islands that exist within the urban landscape. And we do show up to advocate for conservation of those places, particularly when it's, strategically beneficial for something like anadromous fish or migratory birds, or it's an opportunity for engagement, to engage people with nature. And so it also, enhances quality of life for the communities, but it also, creates some climate resiliency from things like heat islands as well as natural hazards. And so we are there talking about those. I think in general, it's true with our climate policy and where we see the greatest conservation benefit. It's from large landscapes, and these smaller pieces within cities maybe don't create quite as much fish and wildlife benefit, but they're a part of the greater picture and a part of the habitat connectivity picture in particular. So I also think that, what else was I going to say on that? So in the urban environment, our focus is still on Goal 5 protection, like riparian buffers, but we do try to advocate where there is that connection back to fish and wildlife. I think we have a little bit of a lane that we stay in the urban environment, because so much of the conversation is about affordable housing and equity and the need for development, and we are strongly encouraging infill development within the cities, but we still play a role. We are still talking about some of the things that you're advocating for. Point well taken, though. I would be interested in talking with you about some of those partners that are really active in the urban environment, see if we can move that conversation forward. As for the rooftops, I'm going to pass that to Jeremy.
Yeah, thanks. Chair Wall, Commissioner King. To get at my slide with the partners, a lot of the siting conversations have specifically targeted Eastern Oregon. Least conflict siting is specifically an Eastern Oregon least conflict siting based on legislative intent. So we're not trying to exclude those partners. These are the partners that have been mandated to come in and play a role within those projects. Additionally, as we talk about rooftop, that's absolutely one of the components that's going into the energy strategy that Odo is putting together now. One of their modeling inputs is how can we better get to our targets by trying to include more rooftop solar within the state, as well as small community-based solar, which would be much more applicable within those smaller spaces. Again, looking at megawatt needs, 6 acres, it's far more difficult, I think, for the utilization of those few remaining open spots. We hope they don't use working lands, honestly, within a lot of our urban environments, because they are so key. So trying to focus on the rooftop, trying to find ways to increase that conversation is one of our goals within this modeling process.
I think one of the things, just to add to that, Jeremy's absolutely right, but just to add to that, what you'll hear from industry is that if we only did rooftops, we will never meet our targets, because the amount of generation that you need, it just will require raw land to scale up to the commercial scale. We continue to be an advocate for co-locating as much as possible. We're seeing some great projects where they're putting solar under wind turbines, and that's another potential solution. But we'll continue to advocate for rooftops as well. But what you'll hear from industry is that, yes, it's a part of the solution, but probably a junior role.
May I, just to follow up on that, I do understand. Go ahead.
Do it real quickly, because we're running over time.
Oh, okay. I understand what they say about, but that doesn't mean do nothing. Like, for example, I get it, we don't have a regulatory role. I get it. Like, but, you have these new Amazon warehouses that have their own zip codes, and there's no rooftop solar. I keep coming back to the disconnect. It just doesn't make any sense to me. We say all these things and we have these bills, but then where's the action? And how do we, I guess, is there anything we can do besides just advocate and keep doing what we're doing? I don't get it.
I think that we'll really look to the statewide energy strategy that Odo is leading to have some of those conversations. What does Oregon want to see in terms of its energy portfolio? What types of energy development do we want to see? What is the need? Those are the conversations we're looking forward to in that statewide conversation.
Commissioner Laphart, and then
Okay, I'll make it quick. First is a comment. As a county commissioner for 12 years, I've always used this statement: when you've seen one county, you've seen one county. So they're all different, but I would, but run by those who show up. And so we need to advocate, we need to show up, and we need to make sure that we're at the table. And I'm sure we're doing that. Keep at it. Just keep at these counties. Because they're required by law to consider fish and wildlife input when they're doing land use decisions. So that's my comment. So another, just a quick question for you, Jeremy. I see that the technology with solar farms, they're starting to consider more and more fish and wildlife habitat by, solar on poles now instead of fencing them. Could you just real quickly talk about, are we moving in a direction where some of these large companies with these massive solar farms are starting to consider incorporating fish and wildlife habitat into these, how they're constructing these solar farms?
Yeah, thanks. Chair Wall, Commissioner Labhart, we're working really heavily at trying to find ways to enhance the opportunity for habitat within those solar farms through creative seeding methods, modification of fence. National Electrical Code states that humans have to be excluded from any electrical generation facility. That doesn't mean that we can't let small mammals in. So, using other than chain link fence, trying to get creative in strategies on how we can get the maximum amount of species utilization within those spaces are conversations that are ongoing, and honestly, they're welcomed by industry. So we're actively working at that.
yeah. First of all, Sarah and Jeremy, I'm so thankful that we have you two.
Thank you.
Because I know you care about these issues and you're out there working every day on this stuff. I'm glad that we have the AFWA and WAFWA lens that's looking at this maybe from more of a national and regional in terms of WAFWA messaging and framework, because that's got to be helpful. It can't be something that you just do here in Oregon.
Right.
I have to say that it makes me feel almost physically sick when I hear we need 180,000 acres of solar more in this state. That is a sobering statistic. And so I know we need renewable energy, and I don't mean to tangent here, but I can remember being, my first job working at the Brothers Stage Stop in between Bend and Burns, pouring coffee. I think I was like 14. I don't know, was there labor laws in Brothers? Maybe not. I thought it was great. But I poured coffee for people who drove through the Oregon Desert every day. And their first question to me was always, there's nothing out here, right? And I'm afraid that that's what, when you say that this sighting is on the east side, when people drive through there, they don't see the pygmy rabbits, they don't see the mule deer migrations, they don't see the pronghorn, they don't see the importance of, beaver modified landscapes tucked up into hillsides. And the solar is layered on top of the solar, the fire, the building development, I'm out here roaring around with my, side by side. The pressure that we are putting is huge. So how do we counter this? I think we counter it by figuring out how to fundamentally change the conversation that we have in the state around our natural resources. We need to create a really big story that we used to have in Oregon. That this is the Tom McCall story. I'm sort of like, don't even visit Oregon. Let's take care of this beautiful, huge region that is important, but we don't have that story yet. It's not about not having renewable energy, it's about recreating a story, and I think that's something we can do, and we can do it with things like our migration corridor mapping that we did. That's amazing. So I don't know. I mean, I don't want to be like, I don't hate solar panels. I get it. But what happens when we reach a point where those are obsolete? It's like dam removal in Klamath. They're busy working on rehabbing those spaces where the dams used to be. Maybe we need to be writing that in somehow to some of these plans. How do we not leave wastelands on the landscape 30 years from now when these solar panels are no longer the latest technology? How do we reconnect? How do we, I don't know. I feel overwhelmed, but I feel very thankful to have you two there. And I don't know, Debbie, Director Colbert, formally, let's tell a bigger story for Oregon's natural resources. Let's make that part of what we do on this commission in the next 3-4 years. Let's do it.
Well said. I appreciate that, and I also want to mention that I think it was very helpful and useful for the department to take this step back and look at the whole thing, this land use. It was a good scope to look at the climate change resiliency pieces, so thank you for that.
Great.
I want to ask a specific question. You mentioned how key it is to have the sage-grouse maps for when we're looking at the mitigation and where that can go, and those sage-grouse maps, I mean, the department worked on those for a long time. That was a remarkable advancement. Are those, we also need then, we put that information out there and together, and we need the regulatory parts of our state to then put them into their maps so they go forward in the land use discussion. Is that on target, and is that going to happen?
Yeah, Chair Wall, thank you for that question. That is still a work in progress. So what needs for the public's benefit in understanding how this works, the state Fish and Wildlife Agency develops the maps based on the best
Right.
available science and updates our sage-grouse plan, which we recently did, and then provides those maps to the Department of Land Conservation and Development. And they are the ones that need to adopt the new maps by rule, which then obligates the local governments to incorporate the new maps into their processes as well. And so we are at the step where we have provided those maps to DLCD, and it's their commission that would need to adopt those maps. They have, I believe it's Measure 56, they have a public noticing requirement that is significant when they make a change like this in terms of letting landowners and affected parties become aware of this proposed change. And so they're at the step of figuring out how, logistically, how to fund that public noticing and how to get that done. And I think once they kind of figure out a strategy for that, we'll see it move forward with LCDC, with the Land Conservation and Development Commission. So we're not quite past the goal line yet, but it's a work in progress.
Thank you, because those were going to come in April, right? Weren't they originally going to come in April, that we would have those DLCD maps?
They were, and then I think it was October, and we just recently got a notification that there will be a further delay.
Wow. Okay. Thank you. The only other thing I want to mention, and Jeremy, you touched on this a bit, but when I think of the department, I think of our biologists in these discussions, and it seems like that's, and I think what you said was that's the relationship that counts. Those local ones are what make these things happen. It just seems a particularly important thing to keep our minds on is how critical our biologists are in that, the hourglass of information. They're sort of at the center. So thank you for the report, Director.
Thank you very much, Sarah and Jeremy. That was great. Thank you very much. Before we wrap up the director's report, I just wanted to call your attention to outside the doors in kind of the center between these two doors. If you get a chance today, stop by. Jeff Yankee was nice enough to bring over a really beautiful picture that was just given to the department in recognition of the Phase 2 Minam Wildlife Area. And so we've got it. We haven't had a chance yet to hang it up, but we've got it out on an easel on display. And we had the celebration in June with all of the partners, and it's just as you all know, just so amazing. And so if you get a chance, stop by and check that out. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. Then would you like to go right into temporary rules?
Sounds good. Commissioners, in your temporary rule packet, you have 18 rules. It's a mix this go-round. You've got 2 from wildlife, about 8 from related to kind of our in-season management of the Columbia, some fish regulations related to temperature, sanctuaries, so quite a variety of temporary rules for your consideration.
Questions, commissioners? 2 quick ones. One is on the pelagic one, we delayed that one because we didn't have the federal, and we adopt that by reference. Do we now have, or are we still adopting before we know what the federal one is? I think it's number 17.
Okay, so,
It's just a quick question, and we can actually get to that one later if you want.
Chair Wall, I actually think that's a different one. We will be bringing the full packet for the pelagic back to you all. That got bumped. This is a second one where we had to do some concurrency with the federal regs.
Thank you. The other one I want to ask about, and this one is number 18, and that's the modified controlled hunt on the Oregon sage grouse seasons. And we talked about this a little bit before. It's come up every time, should we be hunting sage grouse when the numbers are so limited? And I think it would be useful to hear just a little bit, if we could, on this one about, given the fires and that they're coming more and more and the drought, could we hear a little more about how we feel comfortable increasing the hunting in some of these units?
Chair Wall, we'll have our deputy for wildlife join us to speak to that. And it's actually, the adjustments are kind of, in some places we're staying very conservative, and then in others we're making some increases. And so if Brian Wolfer, if you could share a little bit more detail.
Thank you. Chair Wall, Vice Chair Hatfield Hyde, members of the commission, Director Colbert. For the record, my name is Brian Wolfer. I'm the Wildlife Division Deputy Administrator. Yeah, so with sage grouse, we have some really, great news this year. When we talked to you back in April, we were in the middle of doing our spring surveys. We were able to tell you that last year, 2023, with that wet spring, good grass growth, and then a really wet fall with some unusual summer moisture, conditions were outstanding. And during the hunting season, we get really important information about sage grouse production. So hunters turn in wings. We look at those wings and we can tell if the bird was male or female, if it was a chick or a hen. We can tell hatch date of the chicks. And so from that, we get some important reproductive information. And we had just a hair under 2.5 chicks per hen, which is the highest chick per hen ratio we've seen in the 40 plus years that we've been looking at sage grouse wings. So just a tremendous reproductive year. In April, we said, man, we really think this is going to be a great year, but we don't know if those birds survive the winter, if they're on the leks. And so with those lek surveys complete, we've seen across the board over a 60% increase in sage grouse this year. So that really good habitat conditions led to really good production, really good overwinter survival. And we've got a bunch of sage grouse out there, the best numbers we've seen in over a decade. So when it comes to hunting, sage grouse is a bird that we're very conservative with. Hunter numbers are very low. Hunting's important for us to be able to track populations and track population performance. And the science tells us that we can hunt sage grouse up to about 10% of the population before we start having population impacts. So if we're harvesting less than 10%, that's a compensatory mortality. If we get over 10%, it starts to become additive and you see some lower population performance. We set our standard at half of that, at 5%. And then in reality, because we don't know exactly how the hunters are going to do, we shoot even lower than that. So with the temp rule in place now, we expect that those units that would have an increase in permits will likely still see a harvest rate that's less than 2% of the population. But then within that, we do recognize that we've had a couple of big fires this year. Beulah Unit's one that's seen some really big fires. And so with that, and Owyhee saw some fire down in that Cow Lakes country. So those two populations both saw an increase also, but we want to be conservative because we're not sure what the impact of that fire is going to be and that loss of habitat. And so this temp rule does reduce permit numbers in those two hunt areas. But overall, tremendous year. We do have some smaller populations that we don't hunt at all. We wish that we could say, hey, those went up 60% too, and they didn't. They went up, but some of those went up, 10 to 15%. And so we still have concerns with those, and we're not ready to hunt those populations because we feel that they're too low for that at this point.
Thank you, very helpful. We have two other commissioners who'd like to ask a question.
Yeah, and thank you, Brian. I feel like you did already answer this, and Mary, sorry, I keep turning this off, so. Mary sort of asked this, but I guess this is just a time for me to learn something. When you are looking at like the massive scale of fire that we are seeing again, which is again, I have neighbors, I'm thinking of neighbors in the Paulina area. I guess when you're from Brothers, neighbors can be 250 miles away. Whatever, it can be a long ways away, but they, how are we making real-time decisions in these fire footprints about how do we do that? Do you like pull up the sage-grouse map and just like look over the whole thing and put the fire footprint over the top of it and adapt? And this is sort of a question not just about sage-grouse, it's about our hunting, modifications and everything. Can you share how that works? Because I don't quite understand the process.
Chair Wall, Vice Chair Hatfield-Hyde. Our sage-grouse positions, we have our upland game bird coordinator and our sage-grouse coordinator. They're looking at that. And when I talk to them about a particular fire, I can call them out of the blue and they can generally tell me, yes, which leks were within that fire footprint, which core areas, and can often say, this is what we generally see for some hunter distribution and what we might have for hunter displacement or what we'd expect to see some harvest there. So they're very closely tracking that. The other thing, our districts are also talking with those land managers. And so right now, as those fires are getting wrapped up and under control and our federal land managers are looking at how they're going to respond and what they have for financing to go in for rehab, they're talking with our districts are talking with the sage-grouse experts, and we're telling them where our priorities are to invest that money for rehab for the benefit of sage-grouse. And so all that's happening real time. It's happening, over these last couple of weeks with some of the fires we've seen this summer.
Commissioner Lappard.
Okay, so 99.9% of the time, I agree with the philosophy of temporary rules. Those are the rules that need to be put in place in between commission meetings. They're either an emergency or something needs to happen. But the one, and I'll be voting for these, so don't worry about that. But the sage-grouse rules were only adopted a week ago. And so my perception is that sage-grouse is a really big deal. And with the fires and all of that, you put the temporary rule in effect on August 2nd, it's now August 9th. And it just seems like, to me, it would have been, hey, this is a kind of a hot button issue for the commission, for the public, with all the fires, but we need to make a decision. But hey, the commission meeting's only a week away. Let's bring that up at the commission meeting so we can have this discussion, which we just had about sage-grouse, and then we adopt it versus we've already done it, we need you to adopt it. So it's just, for me, 99.9% of the time, I don't have a problem with any of them. This one I had a little bit of a problem with. I thought, I wish somebody would have said, this is really important. Let's wait for the commission meeting because somebody's going to be watching this. And so there's going to be, I think there's going to be questions from the commissioners, which there are, about this. I just wish we'd have waited till August 9th and put it on the agenda and had that discussion. But I will be voting for it. So I totally understand where we are.
I'd like to follow up just real briefly on that because I brought it up and I don't disagree with trying to figure out a way to do that. I also will be voting for this I will vote for this temporary rule and would look to us to the department's been really careful with this, and I appreciated your numbers and that we're well below the 10% and that sort of thing. And it still seems to me that we have to look again in these areas where there's so much fire. Yes, they had a great year, those sorts of things. So I would look to that discussion when it comes up, because this will be right back in front of us before we know it. So I guess I would look for process at that timing. And it's just a huge concern, and I agree with you. So if we could, and I apologize for my phone, I'm the one, it's very embarrassing to be the one that asked everybody else to be careful, so sorry. Could I have a motion?
So, Madam Chair, I move to ratify the 18 temporary rules set forth in the August 9th, 2004 agenda.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to ratify the 18 temporary rules as read into the record. Let's do a thumb vote on this one, Commissioners. Those in favor? Unanimous, Roxy. Thank you. So let's move on to, just a second so I don't do this wrong again.
Okay. Good. This is one of those do as I say, not as I do things. Commissioner Khalil is there. Commissioner Khalil, you're in you're on the big screen today, so you're looking good up there. Michelle sent us out a survey called the 2025 Commission Planning Survey. Did every commissioner get that?
No, I did not.
Okay, it came like a couple weeks ago, so maybe we can get that sent out again today. I got it twice, because I got it once from Michelle and then Director Colbert forwarded it to me. But anyway, what we're trying to do is, in this survey, we're trying to weigh in on all of 2025's locations, making sure we're hitting the different districts that the legislature now has, so that we make sure that we reach that, and thinking about how we want to frame up the year, what our interests are as commissioners for topics, tours, and also sometimes, you know how we do our special, what do you call them, Chair Wall, the workshops, like a special workshop on water or whatever. So there's not a ton of questions on this survey, but this is our opportunity right now to weigh in on 2025. So if we're going to go to the coast, Commissioner Spellbrink, what are you thinking we need to look at? You know, same with you. Let's do this. We're going to Portland. We're whatever. So we need to respond to this. Do as I say, not as I do. I have not yet responded, but let's get on it and let's make sure we have those back before our September commission meeting for
But
sure.
You're resending them when? Because I don't think I got them.
Resend them, please.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.
Roxy has it. Thank you
Roxy's
for
on
bringing
it.
it.
It's not
Okay,
sounding
thank
familiar at
you.
all.
Okay.
Then, just so people know, we will have an exec session after we get through the agenda and after we get through the awards and after we do lunch. So we will, don't leave, commissioners, at the end of that. Come back, please, for an executive session. I don't have other business, do you? Then we will go right to public.
Chair Wall, I have a question. Did we ever do the commission update for WAFWA? Did we ever do that? We skipped it last time.
We did, and we aren't going to do it today, so it will be September, but we will get to it. Don't,
Great.
yes, and could we go to public forum, and the first person is Casey Kula, if I have your name right.
Hi.
Morning. And then we have David Moskowitz as the second person, and as far as I know, there are only two people for a public forum, so go ahead, Casey.
Yeah, and apologies to staff for sitting in your corner. Well, good morning, Fish and Wildlife Commission members and Director, and Roxy. Nice to meet you. For the record, my name is Casey Kula, and I coordinate forest policy for Oregon Wild, which for the past 50 years has been protecting Oregon's wildlands, water, and wildlife for future generations. Now, Oregon Wild is one of the conservation authors of the Private Forest Accord and continues to be closely involved in implementation. ODFW, Oregon Department of Forestry, and the conservation and industry authors together submitted a draft habitat conservation plan to the federal services, which is the core of the historic agreement to strengthen Oregon's forest practices. And we expect comments from the services by October. So I am here on behalf of the conservation authors. I forgot to fully get the permission of all the authors, so I'm just stating the conservation authors. To brief you on the state of the budget for the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife's PFA grant program. And I know that Sarah Reif has kept you up to date on the first round of aquatic habitat restoration funding, and whoever put the amazing story map together is awesome. So if you haven't checked that out, please check out the ArcGIS story map. So already in the very first grant cycle, the program has awarded $10 million to 25 projects around the state. And that's just the first of an ongoing commitment of industry and general fund monies and ODF and partner time to improve habitat and ensure species survival. Now, the PFA, which was incorporated into state law by reference in Senate Bill 1501 in 2021, commits $20 million from the state and $5 million from industry per biennium for ODFW's PFA grant program until federal approval of an HCP, after which the industry contribution goes up to $10 million per biennium. And I'm boring you with these numbers because it's important to have your authority and voice on this issue. Senate Bill 1501 appropriated $10 million of general funds for ODFW for that grant program at the time, and then the remaining $10 million was approved in an ODFW policy option package in the 2023 through 2025 budget. Now, and this is where it gets a little bit sensitive, due to the budget constraints in the governor's guidance to natural resource agencies, that 1% over current service level that you are all aware of, ODFW was unable to include any of the $20 million in general fund commitment in the 2025 through 2027 agency recommended budget. Requested budget, but you know what I mean. The PFA grant program and the long-term investments needed to keep it functioning are core components of the negotiated agreements under the Private Forest Accord authorized in SB 1501 and the updated rules, as well as in the HCP that we've just submitted to the services. So we've committed to this to the federal services. In the 2025 through 2027 biennium, including full funding at the $20 million level for the PFA grant program in the governor's recommended budget and the legislatively adopted budget is critical to the success of the PFA and the finalization of that habitat conservation plan. You're such a good listener, by the way, Commissioner. Thank you. Appreciate it. So, to be clear, the governor must include the full $20 million in the GRB in order to meet the commitments of the legislation, the authors, and the Habitat Conservation Plan. And underfunding these programs in the next biennium puts the viability of the PFA and a federally approved HCP by 2027 at risk. And apologies for all the acronyms, but you know what I'm talking about. So that's where you come in. The agency requested budget is out of your hands. You approved it, I believe, at your last meeting, correct, Chair? Yeah. But we ask you, the conservation authors ask you, to share with the governor your support for full funding of the PFA grant program. You know that it's a long-term commitment that needs to be in the agency's base budget, and you know the ecosystem and the economic value of that restoration work. So I hope you'll join me and the conservation authors in sharing your support for the PFA grant program. And I'm happy to coordinate with whoever you want to in order to really share that information widely and directed it at the governor's office. So thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. And so next time I'll come back with the agency or the industry support as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
And I'm happy to answer questions if you have any.
It doesn't look like we have any, and we typically don't take action as a result of public forum, but this one is one that we're watching closely, and our Commissioner, or Vice Chair Hatfield-Hyde talked about our bigger story and our bigger picture, and for landscape scale work, which is what we're trying for, this is critical. So your points are well taken. We just don't act on public forum.
Oh yeah, absolutely, of course. Yeah, thank you for your time today.
Appreciate it, thank you. Then could we go to David Moskowitz and Can you do the button?
I haven't been trained.
Oh. Okay, we're on the honor system for following the 3 minutes. David Moskowitz, could you go ahead? Yeah, he must be online. Is that right, Roxy? I don't see somebody popping up that looks like David. Then we just got 3 minutes back, and we're going to go to, just so people know, at 11 o'clock the awards start, and that's a very big deal for us. So we're trying to get through these things so we can get to our 11 o'clock award ceremony for staff. So we're going to go to the minutes, and I wonder if any of the commissioners have questions or a motion. These are the minutes from the June meeting. Yeah.
I can make the motion. Looks
Go
like
ahead.
no questions. I move to approve the June 14th, 2024 meeting minutes and with continued authority to correct grammar and punctuation.
I can second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the June 14, 2024 meeting minutes as was read into the record, and I think we will do a thumb vote on this one as well. Those in favor? Thank you. It's unanimous, Roxy. So we can move on then to Wildlife Habitat Conservation and Management Rule, and if Nancy Taylor and it looks like Sarah, right? And I think, is Janelle coming up too? No. Okay.
Janelle is here for moral support, but we'll. Vice Chair Hatfield-Hyde, members of the Commission, Director Colbert. I am Sarah Reif, Habitat Division Administrator, and with me I have Nancy Taylor, our Waterway and Habitat Incentives Coordinator, and we are going to tag team this presentation for you. Okay, so, these are not the correct slides.
Row.
I can try and just wing it, but this is not the correct slide set. I'll go ahead and get started maybe while y'all work on that. So 45% of the land in Oregon is privately owned. Okay, and it's owned and managed privately and plays a really important role for fish and wildlife habitat. And voluntary conservation of land, we talk about this a lot, that voluntary conservation of land is essential, but managing for habitat can be expensive, right? And so it generally does not generate significant income or increase in property value if you choose to manage for wildlife habitat. And it can impact your qualification for other tax deferrals if your emphasis and focus is on wildlife habitat. For example, here in the Willamette Valley, we have a number of landowners who would like to manage for oak habitat. And they are currently in a forest tax deferral, which needs to have some sort of conifer production associated with it or wood product production associated with it. And so if they manage for oaks instead of for conifers, typically involves a removal or minimization of oak on their habitat or on their lands if they want to stay in the forest deferral. So they need tools in order to manage for fish and wildlife habitat. The Wildlife Habitat Conservation and Management Program is it's a tool, it's a tax deferral program that encourages landowners to protect and enhance significant wildlife habitat on private lands. And through this program, landowners who want to manage their property for wildlife habitat instead of or in addition to farming or growing timber may qualify for a property tax benefit. The goal of this program is to conserve, enhance, or improve habitat for Oregon's native fish and wildlife and to advance the goals of the Oregon Conservation Strategy. This program has been around since 1993. ODFW administers the program. Counties must opt into the program, and there are 15 participating counties in the program, so not all of Oregon's 36 counties are participating in this, but if you're a landowner in the 15 participating, then this may be an option. And hopefully if we get the slides up, I'll be able to come back to the map and show you which counties in a minute. Landowners interested in voluntarily managing their lands submit a habitat conservation and management plan to ODFW for our review and approval, and if approved, we notify that county assessor's office, and they take it from there in terms of establishing and approving that tax deferral. And if they do receive the special assessment or the deferral, their property taxes are assessed at that relatively low value, similar to what is applied to farm and forest. So it's a valuable voluntary conservation tool for landowners. It's particularly true for landowners and partners interested in maintaining and restoring the native oak habitats, as we talked about, that are otherwise ineligible for farm or forest tax deferral. There are currently approximately 385 properties enrolled in the program across the 15 participating counties. And when the program was created, the language adopted was prescriptive in terms of obligating ODFW to review plans, monitor all of the enrolled properties, ensure compliance with the program, but it didn't provide any dedicated resources for us to do that work. And this has always been that way. It's always been an unfunded mandate for us, and it's always competed with our other high priorities. Again, in the last presentation, we were talking about the really important role that our regional habitat biologists play in fielding and addressing all of the land use and energy proposals. It's the same staff that also have to manage this program at the district level. And so, in addition to that, they're also being asked to take the lead on a lot of habitat restoration work, a lot of fire rehabilitation work. So we have always struggled to really keep on top of the WHCMP program in its historic state and the way it historically was set up. And so for those reasons, the WHCMP has actually been on pause, an administrative pause, for quite some time now in several watershed districts, especially in the North Willamette, but in some of the other districts as well, as they've been unable to accommodate new applications, much less administer the compliance obligations from all the already enrolled properties. How are we doing on slides?
Steve's working on it.
Thanks, Steve.
Get up in just a second.
Oh, super. Good timing. Here's what you would have seen. So there's those 15 participating counties in gray, largely on west and central parts of the state. So with that challenge in mind, with the difficulty that we've always had, with the fact that it's been paused in several watershed districts for the last 5 years, we began working with stakeholders in 2019 to streamline the program and proposed a legislative concept in the 2023 legislative session to create a more sustainable and effective conservation tool. And especially just, with that goal of opening the program back up to new enrollments in the areas that we had paused, like the North Willamette. So House Bill 2527 in 2023 adjusted the statute, and that statute is ORS 308A, for those that are keen to have some light bedtime reading about tax deferral programs. And we adjusted that statute so that the program could be implemented more effectively and really do a better job of achieving its intended conservation goals. And specifically, the bill created a less prescriptive monitoring and compliance process for us. So it's one of those simple, change the department's obligation from a shall to a may, and lessened the burden on the agency with regard to monitoring. So it's really more of a complaint-based system. It provided greater flexibility for us to focus enrollment on properties that meet our conservation priorities. And Nancy will talk a little bit more about how that then showed up in the rules. And then also promoting the empowerment of our partners. There's a lot of expertise out there, especially in the soil and water conservation districts, who can work directly with landowners to provide that technical advice and project assistance that's needed to help the program be successful. The support for the bill and the statutory revision was really broad in the public testimony during the legislative session. We had, if you pull up the testimony from that bill, I just did that the other day and was just reminded of what broad support there was across the board from a lot of different partners. But I wanted to just give some particular thanks to some of the really active supporters who stood alongside us in the legislature on this one, especially the Clackamas Soil and Water Conservation District, the West Multnomah Soil and Water Conservation District, as well as the Oregon Association of Conservation Districts, the Association of Oregon Counties, and the Network of Oregon Watershed Councils. So really appreciate their collaboration in developing the concepts that ended up getting included in the legislative fix, and just for being there with us. And so with the legislative approval of the statutory changes, the next step, of course, is to revise our administrative rules, which is what we bring before you today. And we're also, we're not done at that step. There's a lot of programmatic improvements that Nancy and Janelle are working on to really streamline how the program functions just administratively for us. So that's the work that continues after today. And so what we bring to you today are the department's proposed updates to the WHCMP program rules to be consistent with the recent statutory change to 308A. And to take you through more of the detail, I'm going to pass it over to Nancy Taylor, who helped lead this rulemaking effort for us. And I'm going to take a moment to just embarrass Nancy for a second. I just really wanted to acknowledge Nancy's efforts here with this. She has a lot of years of experience as a district wildlife biologist in the South Willamette, where this program has always been really active. With this rule revisions, she spent a lot of hours talking with county assessors, with landowners, stakeholders, cooperating agencies, and with ODFW staff to clarify and streamline the process for us. And she's been really responsive to feedback from the public, really adaptive in her approach as some of that feedback led to change in the name of good governance. And her effort, I think, really shows in the quality of the rule revisions that we have before you today. So with that, I will pass it to Nancy.
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning, Chair Wall, Vice Chair Hatfield-Hyde, members of the Commission, Director Colbert. For the record, my name is Nancy Taylor, and I am the Waterway and Habitat Incentives Coordinator in the Habitat Division. Our vision was to create a smoothly functioning wildlife habitat conservation management program that was easily understood by landowners and cooperating partners, enrolling only the properties that add up to a conservation benefit, very important, including improving climate resilience for species, and supported by our participating counties and local conservation partners. The rules amended the process for developing plans, the plan content, the process for self-reporting, site inspection, and removal of land from the program. The rule revisions help clarify the role of the landowner, the cooperating agency that assists the landowner with the plans, and the department. The rules prioritize conservation benefits. Watershed districts will be able to set conservation-based enrollment criteria that make it worth the expense of our time and create a better tool in the private lands conservation toolbox. The districts will be setting priorities and criteria, including the minimum enrolled acreage, specific habitat focus and rankings for habitat type, condition and project context, exceptions considered, and an annual limit on the number of plans approved to balance their workload among their other priorities. The Climate and Ocean Change Policy directs ODF&W to focus habitat-related work on the areas most likely to remain high-functioning despite climate change. This local knowledge exists at the local level. The district criteria will be posted on the website, and the program will revise the criteria periodically as needed or as the program evolves. The new rules help remedy the problem we used to have around department obligations to monitor all of the properties by creating a self-reporting requirement for landowners and shifting to a more complaint-driven system for considering disenrolling properties. Prior to the recent law change, ODF&W's staff was supposed to monitor the wildlife habitat conservation management properties every 5 years. With our existing staff, this task became hard to keep up, and with increasing enrollments, we got further behind, especially in areas where properties kept changing hands. The new process empowers landowners to recommit to the program annually, shifting the burden to them. The new rules strive for realistic timeframes for landowners to self-report and address compliance issues, with multiple reminders encourages landowners to work with cooperating agencies to remedy any issues, and then allows for administrative appeals in non-compliance situations. In terms of public outreach on our proposed rule revisions, we began this effort in December 2023 and continued all the way up to this presentation. Our outreach included a mailing to enrolled landowners in our wildlife habitat conservation management database, and I personally spoke with at least 250 of those landowners. Contacting all of the participating county assessors' offices, we shared drafts of our proposed language with interested soil and water conservation districts, as well as the Association of Oregon Counties. We sent drafts to each of the federally recognized tribes to ensure they were aware of and to offer meetings. We also shared our draft rules with our federal partners at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and a few of our conservation organizations who have been interested and supportive of the WHCMP in the past, such as the Pacific Habitats Birds Joint Venture and Willamette Partnership. And as with any rule revision, we filed our proposed rules with the Secretary of State in February 2024, and based on public feedback we received in the spring, we further revised our proposed rules and refiled those with the Secretary of State in June 2024. During this process and the public comment period, we responded to questions and concerns regarding an administrative appeal process, which we incorporated into the rules, responsibility for landowners already enrolled in the program, and in many cases they are grandfathered from the new criteria, watershed enrollment criteria, such as the minimum definition of large, cooperating agency definitions, and the level of specificity in the rules. We tried to be responsive to all feedback we received. In many cases, this feedback led to improvement of our proposed rule language. In summary, we believe that the proposed rule language provides a balanced approach to continuing to enroll high-value native habitats of conservation concern in the Wildlife Habitat Conservation Management Program while managing the program with a limited existing staff capacity. Therefore, the recommendation is that you adopt OAR Chapter 635, Division 430, to amend the Wildlife Habitat Conservation Management Plan as proposed by staff. And Sarah and I are happy to answer any questions you may have.
Are there immediate questions, Commissioners? We do have one person who would like to testify. Then thank you very much. I will ask Claire Clock to come up. And Nancy, thank you for the 250 conversations. Yeah. If Jeremy's right that those are the conversations that matter, then that was a lot. So thank you. Claire. And you'll have 3 minutes if you will, but we haven't, the clock is not working, so be on your good behavior.
9 minutes, all right, you know. Yeah, Chair Wall, members of the Commission, Director Colbert, I'm Claire Clock from Corbett, Oregon. I've been involved with different stages of the Oregon Wildlife Habitat Plan for the past 29 years and have written plans myself and plans for my own acreage, both for the habitat, the streamside habitat program and the wildlife habitat program. I've been a biologist, conservation specialist, conservation educator, and a farmer for the past 50 years. And I really appreciate Nancy. I was one of the ones that Nancy talked to. And it cleared up a lot of things, a number of my concerns about the program. That program is valuable, not only for the participation. There's some non-type of things like public PR, there's social things that are a part of that program that a lot of people don't see that I saw. But one of the things that I should say that Just in the presentation today, some of my concerns have been allayed because these things can be part of the administrative rules that's ongoing. So one of the things I find that whenever I prepare anything, it always changes because of presentations like this. And so I go off script here. One of the things I think was a concern was that I mentioned in the document I sent you was the practices, age and low income related inequities. And let's just say this example that I'll use is older landowners that want to stay on their property but are unable to farm as they have in the past, and they are willing to set it aside with wildlife habitat. Say it's a large hay field, and they don't want to lose it. They want to stay on their property. They don't want to lose their deferral, but they can't meet the incomes that the counties would require for farming operation. And so if they're forced to either farm it or lose their wildlife for deferral, and the tax ramifications are steep, so they would be forced off their land. So that's a consideration, and that's happened in a number of plans that I've put together. The thing about this is the land can go back to farming if there's a new owner and they want to do that, or they can stay in the wildlife. The other thing that has concerned me with some of the rules was that it doesn't recognize the inherent value of island habitat and connectivity with both wildlife and species between different types of concerns, like strategic areas concerned, those types of things. That's one of the things. The staff has been the problem, I'm saying, in the past. The staff has been one of the problems. It always has had a self-reporting. It's just that the ODF&W never asked for it. And so that is a thing that's being corrected, and I think that'll be really important. The other thing that's important...
Claire, could you just wrap up, because
Yep.
your time is
Those,
up. Thank you.
the plans that are now all need to be reviewed, because some of them actually need to be canceled because they're non-compliant and they don't use the land use anymore, or they need to be altered. So that's it.
Thank
If
you,
there's
and
any
thank you for your
questions?
long work on this one. I don't see questions, but we
Okay.
did see your material that came in writing, so thank you for
Okay.
that.
Thank you.
And for your work. So
Appreciate it.
then could we have staff come back up in case there are questions? And I would just ask if there's anything you can add on the question. I mean, what we're trying to do is keep these lands from developing, and whether they're farming or wildlife. Is there anything you would add to what Claire already mentioned about that particular part? Okay.
Chair Wall, I don't believe so. I think between what we shared with you, and I think Mr. Clark did a great job of just emphasizing that point, that this is an important tool for sustaining natural and working lands.
Yes, sure is. Thank you. We do have one question from the Vice Chair. Oh, we have two, and from Dr. King. So do you want her to go first? Dr. King, you can go first with your question.
Thank you, Chair Wall. I'm looking for the segue, how this links into your prior presentation, where you talked a lot about working lands. And looking at the county map, there's a whole lot of working lands that aren't in this. So that's what I'm getting at. What are the barriers to some of the counties that would have sort of this open space that would fit into the working land and things you're trying to protect in that prior presentation, but yet they're not signing up for this Wildlife Habitat Conservation Management Program, which would keep them as working lands, right?
Mm-hmm.
Potentially.
Mm-hmm. Chair Wall, Commissioner King, that's a question that also came up during the legislative hearing. And so we actually worked through the Association of Oregon Counties to better understand what precludes a county from choosing to participate in the program. And what they found in their query of the counties they spoke to is there's a number of reasons. Either they don't feel that they deal with revenue constraints where they're not capable of accommodating the lost revenue, or they have enough reason to think that they don't have suitable lands for the program. In other cases, it is a lack of awareness, which we then take as something, oh, well, that's something we can help with. That's something we can work on. And so as we're working on program enhancement, we're taking that into consideration. But those were the three primary reasons that the AOC cited for us when they spoke to the counties. It really is up to the counties to decide whether they want to participate. But if awareness is the problem, we can help with that.
Thank you.
Great. Vice Chair.
I was just going to make a motion if we're ready.
I think we are. Go ahead.
Okay.
That would be great.
And also, thank you, Nancy. Oh my gosh. Talking to all these landowners. We're all pleasant landowners. I move to approve the amendment to Division 430 as proposed by staff in Attachment 3.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the amendments to Division 430 as just read into the record. Any final questions? If not, let's have a roll call vote on this one if we could. Roxy?
Hatfield Hyde,
Yes.
Wall,
Yes.
Labhart,
Yes.
Spellbrink,
Yes.
King,
Yes.
Khalil.
Yes.
Thank you, Roxy. And it's unanimous, so thank you again.
Thank
And
you
we'll
very
go
much.
on to Ken Laufink and licensing.
Good morning. Hello again. Chair Wall, Vice Chair Hatfield, Hyde Commissioners, Director Colbert. For the record, my name is Ken Laufink. I'm the Acting Deputy Director for Administration. Today, I'm going to be seeking approval of some rule updates pertaining to three separate Oregon administrative rules, really centered around agency operations and some of our core businesses that we do. And I'll get into each of those here momentarily, just a brief presentation summarizing our proposed changes. Really, these are changes that we think better align with our current business needs, create efficiencies, provide some clarity. These have been ready and actually in the hopper for some time, but we know you're all very busy, and so chose this moment to make the presentation. Oh, use the clicker. I gotta follow directions. There we go. So the first Oregon administrative rule we're proposing to update is OAR 635-001-0070. And this is all about agency representation by an employee. So let's talk about what that means a little bit before I get into our rule updates. So I'll paraphrase here, but the Administrative Procedures Act, which is codified in Oregon Revised Statute 183, basically allows members of the public to contest certain matters in front of an administrative law judge in the Office of Administrative Hearings. So an example for ODFW would be if we deny a commercial fisheries permit application, that individual would have an opportunity to essentially contest that decision in front of an administrative law judge. This rule that we're seeking to update provides the subject matters or issues that an employee, as designated by the director, may represent ODFW in those contested case hearings. In most cases, our DOJ attorney would be present and would represent the agency in addition to the employee. In these cases, we're seeking these updates so that an ODFW staff member could represent the department in lieu of a Department of Justice attorney. So the updates specifically are adding the following issues as eligible to be represented by an employee. That's disqualification from the Wildlife Habitat Conservation Management Program, which we just heard an update from. A suspension or revocation of commercial and recreational hunting and fishing licenses, denial of commercial fishing licenses, vessel licenses, or limited entry permit applications, suspension or revocation of limited entry commercial fishing permits, and denial of fish propagation license applications and/or suspension or revocation of fish propagation licenses. So why is this a good idea? Well, these are matters where ODFW employees or a program lead would already be involved. Whether or not they can represent the agency solo or with a DOJ attorney. Our staff are already going to be heavily involved in almost all cases. When we go to a contested case, our staff are there and help present the information. And also, in many cases, we're not providing a legal argument. We're just providing the facts of the case, if you will. These are the facts. These are the reasons why the application was denied, that sort of thing. So it's an efficiency, allows for a quicker process, which benefits our public and ODFW operations. There's a little bit of cost savings there, but it's really not about the cost savings. It's just about efficiency of operations and decision making. And in addition, even though these are listed here, if there are those extenuating cases where like we really want our attorney's help, we'll certainly ask and they'll be there for us. So moving on, the next rule that we're seeking an update to is our license refunds. So our license refund policy is listed in Oregon Administrative Rule 635-010-0027. And it provides the specific circumstances in which ODFW may grant a refund for license purchases. It's pretty simple in its current form, and it's limited to when there's a mistake, if a mistake was made either by ODFW or an agent, or if there's a death of a tag holder before the season starts. It's a little more nuanced than that, but it really is fairly limiting to those circumstances. So over the years, we see refund requests come in, and there's a lot of cases where like it's a compelling case, and from a customer service standpoint, we really want to and should be providing a refund. It's just not supported by rules. So this is an effort to provide a little more flexibility in those rules, allow the director to make the call in certain cases for whether or not we should issue a refund. There is some balancing there of like not opening it up too much, but we think this is a fair balance and that provides some flexibility to the department while not opening it up too much out of control. And that specific add or update for this rule is we're just adding extreme, special, or unforeseen circumstances beyond the control of the license or tag holder as a scenario in which we could issue a license refund. And the next rule update we're seeking approval for is to our preference point reinstatement policy, and that is found in Oregon Administrative Rule 635-060-0046. And this is the rule that provides those circumstances that ODFW may grant reinstatements of controlled hunting preference points. So as we all know, you apply for a certain hunt series. If you don't, if you're not successful for that hunt, you receive a preference point that can be used for future controlled hunt applications. If you are successful in drawing your tag, your preference points go down to 0. Now, there are certain situations, it's pretty rare, I'd say, we get 30 to 50 per year where someone draws a tag, their preference point balance goes down to 0, and something happens, they can't participate in the hunt, they get sick, they get injured, and they apply for a preference point reinstatement. So again, these updates are focused on providing a little clarity to those circumstances in which the department may issue a preference point reinstatement. So let's say you had 10 points, you draw a tag, you can't do the hunt, you apply for a preference point, reinstate those, your balance goes back to where it was before. And again, over the years, we get these that come in and we're like, there's a compelling case, just like the license refunds. We really, from a customer service standpoint, should be giving a preference point reinstatement, and that's not necessarily supported by rules. So again, these updates are focused on improving that, providing clarity and some operational efficiency. And specifically, those updates are expanding the definition of circumstances beyond the person's control. So that was already in there in the existing rule, but the existing rule just states what that is not. And we're saying also what that is in this update. So what it is not is a complaint about the quality of the hunt, the weather was bad, it snowed on me, that sort of thing. But what it could be are just other things, other unforeseen circumstances that results in a person's inability to make the hunt. This could include emergency closures, administrative closures of the hunting unit, things like that ODFW actually does, or just other issues. And again, it puts the purview on the director and staff to kind of make those decisions as far as what qualifies and what doesn't. We also expand and clarify the definition of tragic personal circumstances. The existing rule basically says that's death of a family member or an injury that requires hospitalization. We expand that just a little bit to say, based on physician orders, you get the physician says, you threw your back out and you're out of commission for a month. That would be a situation in which we might allow preference point reinstatement. With this added flexibility, we also wanted to take the opportunity to make sure that we tighten things up and put some controls on when this could occur. So we provide a limitation on how often a person may be eligible for a preference point reinstatement, and so we chose once every 10 years, and that's just a nod again to this is something that's pretty rare. We don't want this to be a regular occurrence and have it be really selective in when it occurs. And then we added a time limit, and this one's pretty important. We actually would get preference points reinstatement requests that were 5, 6 years old, and there was nothing in rule that said that was a problem. And as you can imagine, the circumstances in which things occurred 5, 6 years ago or more can get a little blurry. So this basically adding a time limit that a person has to apply for a preference point reinstatement within 2 years of the end date of their controlled hunt. And then finally, for you all, we clarified what the commission's role is in this process. The existing rule didn't do a great job in this. The existing rule says that a person whose preference point reinstatement gets denied can appeal to the commission, and the commission must hear that within 60 days, and there's kind of a period there. So we added just a little bit of clarity to provide a better definition of what the commission's role is, and we also extended the 60 days to 90 days, give us a little more time when these come in. To my knowledge, as far as I've been around, I don't think we've ever heard one of these. We do a pretty good job of handling them at the staff and director level. But if one does crop up to your level, we'll have to respond within 90 days. And we put in the rule that basically the commission can handle it how they want. It can be an actual exhibit, agenda item, or it can be handled in other business. And consistent with the existing rule, it's not one where we hear argument. It's more like, here's the facts of the case and make a decision. So with that, staff are recommending the approval of these proposed updates to Oregon Administrative Rule. Think they better align with our current business operation needs, provide clarity and flexibility where needed, and will improve efficiency. I have a draft motion up there for your consideration. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ken. And we don't have testimony, commissioners, on this one, so. Commissioner Labhart, you have a question.
Yes, thank you. I'm really surprised we didn't get any public letters or testimonies on this, because in my opinion, what we've done, this is a classic example of customer service, where we've tried to address some of the issues that are out there. You know, my worry is no good deed goes unpunished. You'll have people that will try to, oh, well, they're being more flexible, so I'm going to take advantage. I hope that doesn't happen, because we're trying to address some of the issues that are out there that are really valid points. So I fully support and compliment the staff for their work on putting these, I think it's 3, together. So well done.
Thank you.
Thank you. Then, seeing no other questions, could I have a motion on this one?
Okay, I'll make the motion. I move to approve the amendments to the Oregon Administrative Rule 63501-070, 63501-0 and 027, and 63506-0046 as set forth in attachment 3.
I'll second.
And it's been moved and seconded to approve the amendments to Oregon Administrative Rules 6350010-0070 and 6350010-0027 and 63506-0046 as just read into the record. Could we do a roll call on this one, Roxy?
Hatfield Hyde,
Yes.
Labhart,
Yes.
Spellbrink,
Yes.
King,
Yes.
Khalil.
Yes, and I think Commissioner Laphart should consider becoming an auctioneer. So that was very impressive.
And Wall.
Yes, so that one is unanimous and passes, and thank you, Ken. And we'll find the people who were going to testify and write in on this one later, so. We are set now for an 11 o'clock awards ceremony for our staff, which is, as I mentioned before, a very big deal and a big part of what we come to the August meeting for. So, but it is quite a while before 11 o'clock, and some of the families and others will be arriving at 11. So we're going to take a break, commissioners, a 10-minute break. Don't leave yet, though, because what we will do then is go into executive session and do what we can of executive session, and then come back in here in plenty of time for the 11 o'clock. So I have to do the read into the record piece so we can go into executive session, and then we'll ask the director to direct us where we're supposed to go for that. The commission will now meet in executive session. This executive session is to consider information and records that are exempt by law from public inspection as authorized by ORS 1926602F, as well as to consult with legal counsel concerning legal rights and duties regarding real estate as authorized by ORS 192.6602H. Under Oregon state law, executive sessions are closed to the public. Representatives of the news media are allowed to attend. Reporters are directed not to report on the discussions during exec session except to state the general subject. No decisions will be made in executive session. So where will we go for that?
Commissioners, we're going to be going up to the leadership room because the classroom is being used for the barbecue activities. So we'll head upstairs, and then Commissioner Khalil, you should have a link for it. Okay.
So 10 minutes and then upstairs in the leadership room. Thank you all.